You're listening to the Good Food CFO podcast, where we challenge the status quo of the food industry, celebrate good food founders who are building businesses on their own terms, introduce industry disruptors, and are redefining equitability. If you're ready to build your financial confidence and join the good food revolution to change the way the food industry does business, you are in the right place. I'm the Good Food CFO and your host, Sarah Delavan. Hey, Chelsea, you ready for another episode?
Yeah, definitely.
I want to kick this one off with a news story that's not something you would actually see in the news or online. It's a little bit of what I'll call insider info about some changes coming up at Whole Foods.
Ooh, Whole Foods. Okay, let's get into it.
So earlier this year, I think it was back in the summer, brands, not all of them, some of them received emails regarding Whole Foods' change in fee structure surrounding promotions. So they're rolling out what is called store brackets that they're going to use for their promotional fee program. Now, the store bracket system, is currently in place, but they're changing it a bit. So I'm going to talk about the changes, and then I want to talk about the effects that these changes are going to have, just sort of like specifically to Whole Foods, but then also in sort of a general way as well. So Whole Foods has 4 brackets currently, right? In 2023, they're going to have 4 brackets in 2024, but this year, they're using regions, right? So if you are in 1 to 3 regions, if you are in 4 regions, if you are in 5 to 7 regions, right? Though each of those is its own bracket. Beginning in January of 2024, they're switching it from a region-based bracket system to a percentage of stores bracket system. So the lowest bracket is going to be bracket number 4. And that is if a brand is in less than 25% of stores, they will be bracket number 4. And from what I understand from information that was provided to me from someone else, less than 25% of stores is about 120 stores, just to kind of give that,
Okay.
kind of quantify that a little bit. So then you've got bracket number 3, which is no less than 25% of stores. Bracket 2, which is no less than 50% of stores. And then bracket number 1, the highest paying bracket, is going to be no less than 75% of stores. Okay. So that's a bit of a change that's happening there. It seems like there are some brands that maybe didn't have to pay fees historically that will have to pay them beginning January 2024. Full disclaimer here, I haven't talked to a lot of brands about this personally. I've talked to a couple, and obviously the one that sort of shared this information with me as well. So what this means is essentially that if you want to run a promotion of some kind, so this is going to include everything from a temporary price reduction, so like a promotion, right? 50% off, $1 off, whatever that might be. If you want to run one of those, if you want to do a fixture that's like, let's say, an end cap, or like a bin that's a value bin, or you want to have your product stationed somewhere where it's like a quick impulse buy, right? There's going to be a fee for that. If you have a seasonal SKU, if you want to run a weekly promotional marketing, if you want to have in-store demos, if you want to be a part of their supplier road shows, like all of these types of things that Whole Foods offers as marketing and promotions in store and in flyer, there are fees associated with that. And the fees are going to be applied according to the bracket that you are in.
Okay.
So where this is going to hit most of the brands that listen to this podcast, I believe, is going to be in the temporary price reductions, which we're going to shorten to TPR. Okay. So a temporary price reduction, if you're in bracket 4, where maybe historically you ran a promotion and then just paid for, you paid the chargeback, right? So let's say the total price reduction to customers was $400, right? During that promotion time, you're going to pay the $400 back to the store. Now, in addition to that $400, if you're in bracket 4, you're also going to pay $2,700 just as a fee, as a flat fee.
Okay, so as someone on the outside, this is what I wanted to understand about this story. I've heard you talk about trade spend before. I've been with the company for a while, right? I do have some rudimentary understanding of trade spend, but I want you to break this down a little bit more for me. So what I hear you saying is that not only do I now, as a brand, have to pay to play when it comes to temporary price reductions, like you were just talking about, but I can't even pay to play until I pay. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, I consider pay to play being the $2,700,
Yeah,
the flat fee. Like that is the paying to play, in my opinion, because you have to pay that fee in order to run a promo. So, yes, what you're saying is accurate. I would just call the pay to play that front end expense. And the problem with that, right, is that in order to drive trial, meaning in order to get someone who's maybe looked at your product a couple of times but has never purchased it because of the price point, or they're just like not sure, they're afraid to take a risk, right? Or you're a brand new product in a new region and you want to get folks to try your product, there is now a greater cost to you to drive trial, because this is
yeah.
not a one time pay to play fee. This is if you want to run a temporary price reduction once a quarter, you're paying $2,700 a quarter each
Every
time you run the
quarter.
promo. Yeah.
Jeez.
And as you move through the bracket, so that lowest bracket is $2,700. The next, bracket 3 is going to be $5,500. Bracket 2 is $8,300, and bracket 1, that top, tier bracket, is $11,000 to run the promo. And I'm sure, there is work that goes into running a promo, right? But I don't know that, that's a whole nother conversation to argue whether or not it's appropriate to charge a fee to run a promotion in store. I mean, especially when in many stores it's considered a required activity to participate. Now, when we talk about things like the off-shelf fixtures, as they're called, like that end cap, like that impulse like position, that's something where there's always been a fee to have that kind of placement. So it's nothing new that there's a flat fee for that. The new thing happening with Whole Foods is that the fees are changing and they're structured by bracket. So let's talk about like the impulse fixture, right? Bracket number 3 would pay $2,500 a month to have their product in that fixture. Bracket number 2 would pay $4,000, and bracket number 1 would pay $7,333 a month. So depending on how broad your reach is in the Whole Food stores, how many stores you're in, is going to affect how much you pay. And so, I think this is important to talk about here because it's new, it's rolling out in January. If you are selling at Whole Foods and if this is going to affect you, you should have known about it actually way back in July, because that's when, I think the end of July is when promotions for the upcoming year needed to
Mm.
be put in place. I want to talk about it here because this is an ever evolving thing. This idea of trade spend, this idea of the cost of paying to play, right? We see it increasing in a variety of different ways. And that is something that we need to keep our, finger on the pulse of as we try to figure out how we push this good food movement forward and get more good food, into more homes, because some of that is going to have to happen through traditional grocery stores.
Yeah, and I think it's, stories like this and as you called it, insider information, right? Like as a consumer, this is not something I'm going to be able to go on the internet and find a news article and learn about this. And I think that it really explains why, as a consumer, when I walk into a Whole Foods, maybe why the brand that I love isn't in the impulse fixture like it always was, right? Or why the price has gone up or gone down, or, things that I don't, as a consumer, understand when I'm walking through the grocery store. This is it really shines a light on
Yeah.
and helps me as a consumer, I think, to make my own choices.
Yeah. And in that vein, sharing it here on the podcast as well is right. We want founders to be able to make their own choices, right? So this is not a conversation that we're having because we want to prevent a brand from working with Whole Foods. Certainly not. It's all about being fully informed, being aware, knowing what types of questions to ask, whether you're working with Whole Foods or whether you're embarking on a partnership with a different national retailer, right? The more you know that retailers are doing, the more you know sort of what they're up to and what changes are happening in certain stores, the increased awareness you have and the better questions you can ask that retailer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to bring this news story today to this episode because we are talking about pulling out of retail and what that has looked like for some brands, as well as what other forms of what we like to call right sizing has looked like for some brands and what the results of those changes have been. Fees like this at Whole Foods and other practices of large retailers and distributors are sometimes the catalyst for brands right sizing, right? And kind of pulling out of retail, if you will. And sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're the result of other things happening within a business. But I wanted to talk about this and have this conversation because for every brand founder that I talk to who's considering making a change like this, considering right sizing, contracting, downsizing, there are many who feel like they can't do it. And so this
Mm.
is really, I think, a conversation to celebrate the founders who are building businesses on their own terms and finding the right size for themselves and for their businesses, and a little encouragement for those who may be fearful of making what feels like a very big change.
Yeah. And we're actually going to hear from a few founders in their own words about this exact topic and how they're navigating it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
So,
excited. Should we
yeah,
get to it?
let's do it.
Recently on the podcast, the Good Food CFO shared her thoughts on the Shopee Shop article from Grub Street. Now we're inviting you to share your thoughts. Join us for a live fireside chat inside the Good Food CFO community tomorrow, Tuesday, November 28th. Fireside chats are a space to share your thoughts, stories, and experiences to create more transparency in the food industry. This event is available to all community members. If you're not a community member yet, you can join by visiting thegoodfoodcfo.com/join. And now back to the show.
This past August, we had a really wonderful panel discussion surrounding the true cost of food. You can listen to that full episode. It's episode 75. And it was such a great, lively, extensive conversation that we actually couldn't publish the entire thing as an episode. And we created 2 bonus clips available inside of our Plus membership with additional content. And one of the clips is called Retail and the True Cost of Food. And in that clip, Vincent Fanazzo, the founder of Riverwards Produce, says, you either play the game or you make your own. And he's talking about playing the game of big retail. And as the conversation went on, I asked the question, can a business reel it in and make the math work? And what I was talking about there is if you choose to not play the game of big retail, you choose to pull out, can you make the numbers work? Can you have a financially viable and successful food business. And since that conversation, I have worked with a few brands that have right-sized their businesses by either pulling out of retail, contracting from national to regional or regional to local brands, or removing a business line completely. And these are all changes that resulted in them being more profitable and having more cash flow in their business. And I want to talk about that today because for all of the founders who are making these changes, there are many other founders who aren't. And through conversation with founders, I have come to understand that the reason they aren't making these changes is because of the fear of failure. That making your business, quote, smaller is a failure as a business owner. And one founder actually said it feels like going backwards.
Yeah, I understand that way of thinking. And it's something that we hope to change right here. Traditional business media celebrates big revenue, celebrates new accounts, celebrates growth and scale. Cutting revenue in the short term, letting go of accounts, and scaling back are the exact opposite of what is celebrated.
Yeah.
So, of course, it feels bad and like you're moving in the wrong direction.
Yeah. And we need to look at the benefits of doing things differently, really the benefits of doing what is right for your business rather than what's generally celebrated in the public eye without context.
Absolutely. I think you're right. And so, Sarah, I want to start off by talking about why a company or a business would want to right size.
That's a great question. And typically it comes down to three main things or three primary things. Number one on top of the list is cash flow, or perhaps I should say lack of cash in the business. Number two is often that a founder has hit their like risk threshold, right? They don't feel comfortable taking on more risk, whether that's in the business itself or in terms of, debt and financial risk. And the third factor is things like exhaustion, internal difficulties in the business, right? And that could be as a result of cash flow issues and dealing with the stress of the amount of financial and business risk you have taken. It could be that the company just internally isn't functioning well. And we'll dig into the whys of that in a couple of minutes, but if you have a business that just isn't operating smoothly, and when that happens, it can be a good time to say, like, let's take a pause and right size our business either temporarily or permanently to make things work a little bit better.
I actually want to take a step back from there. Could you explain to me what would cause a business to get into that position in the first place?
That's a great question. So, what I hear you asking is like, how does a business end up with cash flow issues, or how does a business end up with internal difficulties or hitting their risk threshold? And it's a great question. And I think on a sort of a high level view, it often happens because a founder is building the business they think they should be building, or they're growing at a pace that they think they should be growing. And that is often sort of like the root cause of a lot of reasons and a lot of causes. But if we're going to get really specific, some of the most common things that I see are, number one, the gross profit margin of products. We talk about this a lot around here because it's so important, and we do a deep dive into it in the Rethinking Cash Flow episode. But if you are selling a product that has a profit margin below 50%, it means that additional funds from somewhere else, either your business savings or a line of credit or debt of some kind outside of the business, is needed to fund the continuation, not the growth, but just the continuation and maintenance of those sales channels or those customers. So we most often see this in distribution and in wholesale direct relationships, but it can happen in all sorts of businesses. The other thing that plays a part particularly in retail and distribution, is trade spend. Trade spend is such a high cost of doing business. And a lot of founders either don't know what they're getting into when they're signing agreements because they don't know what questions to ask, or they think they understand what they're agreeing to, but they don't have a full understanding. You might also, be taking advantage of an amazing opportunity like opening a national retailer, and that's going to cost you $250,000 in some cases, just in, slotting fees alone. That's not accounting for any new distribution centers you might have to open. It's not accounting for any promotions that you may need to run. And you might enter into trade spend fully informed, but the results of that financial impact on your business may be unexpected and may cause cash flow issues and stress, just generally or related to debt, right? We also know that a lot of people use brokers and merchandisers, and these are valuable participants in the landscape of retail and distribution. But sometimes we onboard these supportive people and they detract from the profit margin of a particular, retail partner. And we may not realize that, right? What the expense is and how it's affecting our overall gross profit margin. So a lot of these come back to margin, as you can tell. The last thing I'll mention, and we've seen this a couple of times, we've talked about it, I think, a couple of times here on the show, is that brands get introduced into a new retailer. It's very exciting. They pay the slotting fees or they provide the free fills, and the sell-through rate at those stores is not high enough for the store to keep them on the shelf, and they'll be discontinued within 6 months. I mean, we're starting to hear rumbles with inside the industry that that's simply just the model of certain retailers, that they'll onboard new brands, earn a bit of money in terms of those fees, and get them off the shelf relatively quickly. I mean, again, that's rumblings in the industry. It's not for sure information, but we also have seen for sure that when you're launching into a new retailer, there's a lot that's out of your control. You can't force your distributor to deliver to every store that you've just onboarded with. You can't always ensure that your product is on shelf and available when and where it's supposed to be. And so there are things that are out of your control that will have an impact on your cash flow and on your stress level, and on how you're feeling about running your business. And all of those things, roll up to cash flow issues, risk tolerance issues, and potentially those stress and sort of internal difficulties. So these are some of the reasons a brand might right size by contracting from a nationally distributed brand to a regional brand, or from a regional brand to a local brand. And I had a chance to speak with the founder of Vermont Tortilla about this very topic and some of the reasons that they right sized from a national brand to a regional brand. So, April, Vermont Tortilla is a regional tortilla brand. Have you always had being a regional business as your vision and your goal, or did you have different aspirations at one point?
So we started as a regional brand, and then we started to attend various trade shows like Expo East, Fancy Food Show, and everyone that we met with at the shows, the brokers and all the salespeople, would say things like, "You need to get into this store, you need to get into this store." And before I knew it, we were trying to get into stores all over the place. So not just in our region, but outside of our region. So we started to go for some of these larger accounts without even really realizing what we were getting ourselves into financially.
Right. Was it observations over time? Was it something in particular that happened that after you started to grow into these various locations that made you more of a national brand, that you decided to, I'll call it, contract back to a regional brand?
one thing that we realized after we got a national account that we were really excited about is that we didn't have the money to support that account. So when you're working with a larger retailer, they are going to have expectations in terms of promotions, in terms of everyday low price, in terms of advertising spend, demos, you name it. There's all kinds of programs that they want you to participate in that are expensive. And as a smaller brand, not backed by venture capital, we did not have the funds to sustain the type of growth that they thought we would get if we were to invest, as they call it, in our brand.
Outside of the retail and distribution conversation, any type of food business could be struggling with cash flow. They might be bumping up against that risk, tolerance level, or struggling with internal difficulties due to simply lack of clarity within their business. And that might look like a couple of different things. That might look like the founder having all of the recipes in their head and their team not having access to that information without asking, right? That causes all sorts of difficulties and issues. It might be that the operations team or the kitchen and production team don't have the tools and the resources, as well as the information that they need to operate as efficiently as possible to keep, ingredients and food costs on target, every time they produce the product. And that can lead to all sorts of different problems, right? We also see businesses that are running without an understanding of their cost of goods sold. What does it cost to actually make their product? And with that, without that core piece of information of growing your business is actually potentially detrimental, right? Because if you're not selling a profitable product, if you're selling a product that's profitable, but the margins are below that 50% mark, we know that that's actually going to eat up more and more and more cash flow the more you grow. So in these instances, right sizing by removing a business line, either permanently or temporarily, or contracting the business that you are running are really good ideas, because that's going to give you the space that you need to dig in and do the foundational work that you need to do to be able to grow confidently in the future. I recently had a conversation with Leah Farazani, who is the founder of Semolina Pasta, about why she decided to eliminate some business lines or sales channels from her business. Now let's take a listen to that. So Semolina is a retail shop where you sell your pasta, you sell other products. You have an amazing little sandwich business that runs out of there, the greatest sandwiches, Italian ices, and in the back of the retail store and to the side of it, you have your pasta production, which for a couple of years or several years, you've been selling not only wholesale direct, but also through distribution to larger retailers. And you shared in the True Cost of Food episode that you had pulled out of UNFI in the past. And recently, so within 2023, you also made the decision to stop working with, at least for now, the distributors that you had been working with. Can you talk a little bit about what was happening and why you made that decision?
First of all, working with the distributors that I left recently and UNFI is like night and day.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't want to totally discount the level of partnership, especially with Foundation Foods that I had. The advocacy, the work that they did to get our brand on shelf and keep it on shelf and really understand the moving parts of a small food business or small to medium food business as opposed to a behemoth. They were fantastic partners. That said, with all of the cost increases over the last 2 years, even with a price increase on my own end, the margins to sell at that tier really just don't make sense.
Yeah.
The place that like running projections, it felt like, and this may be a slight exaggeration, but it felt like to really see the profitability that I used to have at that same tier, I needed to 10x the business. And that's a business that makes £1.5 million of pasta a year.
Yeah.
That's a fundamentally different operation. It is a truly streamlined factory that has automation in packing. I mean, that's a huge part of where we were struggling, is the time that it took to pack.
Yeah.
It either is drying the pasta much faster and at higher temperatures than we do to make that process shorter to be able to maximize the space, or finding other shortcuts. And those were never principles. Shortcuts has never been a principle that I've operated on. And automation isn't a cutting of corners, it's an investment. And the revenue isn't there to financially pay for the investment. And the space isn't there to fit the equipment. There isn't right size equipment, which also means then there's not right priced equipment to hit that middle tier. So like if you start adding it up, it's like, well, I can't go from 150,000 pounds to like 350,000 pounds or something like that, right? Like get like a small packing machine. It's like, no, like I have to get the packing machine for this much, much larger business, which means that I have to make that much pasta to even justify having the $50,000 packing machine to make the same amount of money that I used to make.
Yeah.
Making less pasta.
Yeah.
And when I think about the parts of the business that I love, the parts of the product that I love, that the product that I would make, how do I reconcile those? And do I have the same connection with the business at £1.5 million? Do I get the opportunity to talk to my customers? Like that is so important to me, to feel like I am bridging a gap between somebody and the thing that they're feeding people. And so I just couldn't see myself in that bigger picture business.
Yeah.
So we've heard from two founders now who made decisions to right size their business and really why they made those decisions. But I'm curious to know still how those changes affected profitability, cash flow, getting realigned with their risk tolerance, all the things that we've talked about today.
Yeah. Well, right off the bat, in terms of cash flow, when you identify that something's not working in your business, right? You identified the strain on cash flow, right? And in a lot of the examples we gave today, it was distribution or retail, right? When you identify the source of low profit margins, that drain on your cash flow, as I said, and you eliminate it from your business, right? What you're left with typically is higher margin sales channels. So right off the bat, your gross profit margin is increasing, and that's going to allow you to hang on to more of the money that you are earning in your business, right? So that has a pretty direct correlation to cash flow and a pretty quick impact on it as well. The other thing that we see in terms of profitability is that when you're spending less, you are more profitable, right? And so for some businesses, when we looked at April's numbers, for example, her profit on the P&L, it seemed to change overnight. It was a very, very quick change. With Semolina, it's taking a bit longer to see the kind of change that we saw with Vermont Tortilla, but we're ticking closer and closer and closer month over month over month. And it's because you've taken the time during the contraction, during the right sizing, to say, what do I need? What do I not need? Where am I spending money? Where am I not spending money anymore? And it essentially right sizing is making your business profitable at the core, right? And not just profitable, but also manageable. And so when you make your business more manageable, more profitable, you're going to see the changes on the P&L. You're going to see the changes in cash flow. Many founders also feel the change in terms of the lightness, in terms of the space they have to be creative and to truly build the business of their dreams. And so it doesn't look exactly the same for every single founder and for every single business, but without a doubt, when we've made very thoughtful changes in terms of right sizing a business, the impacts on cash flow and profitability happen quickly and they're pretty significant.
So, Sarah, for any founders that might be out there thinking, listening to this episode and thinking, oh, maybe it's time I take a look at my business, and do I need to right size? Do I need to pull out of retail, or don't I? Where can they go to get some support in that kind of thought process?
Well, I'm going to point them in 3 different places depending on where they're at in their business. So if you're a founder who's listening and you don't know the cost to produce your product, or you don't know the profit margins of each of your product in each of the sales channels that you sell through, I highly recommend that you take a little bit of time and work through our perfect pricing calculator, because that's really going to show you very clearly what your margins are. And if they're not, above that 50%, we provide some recommended targets for each type of sales channel. If you're not hitting those, then you can start to make some decisions from there, right? So that would be step 1. If you've done that work, you've got profitable products, the next thing I would recommend that founders do is to complete a profit assessment. This is a tool that we use with all of our clients every single month. But when you do it for the first time and you do a full 12-month assessment, you really get a big picture view of how your business is performing financially. And the coolest thing about the profit assessment is that it comes with a decision tree. So you can walk through the numbers with me inside the course and then use the decision tree to identify, where do I need to focus time and attention in my business to change the financial outcomes. Here is where you may get some inclination on whether or not you need to right size your business. And if signs are pointing to yes, the third step that I would direct people to would be to complete a financial forecast. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be a simple model, but this is where you're going to do the work of looking at what your business looks like financially if you were to, pull back from national distribution to a regional distribution, or from regional to local. It might, it's going to help you identify, if I pull out of wholesale altogether and I become a D2C brand, what does that mean for my business? And that's so important, Chelsea, because we don't want you making sudden and drastic changes to your business without a firm understanding of the financial implications to that, right? If you were to downsize to D2C, in 1 week's time, you might have shrunk your revenue to the point where you can't cover your bills, right? You might need to make team changes that also need to be downsized. So the point here is that I want you to go into any right sizing and any decision making around right sizing fully informed, and also with the ability to create a plan of how are we going to roll this out. No one that we talked to today within this episode made these decisions overnight, nor did they implement the changes overnight. They were planned, they were thought out, and they got, kind of rolled out over a few weeks time. And I think that that's really important to note.
I love those tools, Sarah. I think that, just like you said, they do give you a big picture view of your business. And for anyone who might be working through those tools and need some additional support, I think I would also say our office hours, the weekly CFO office hours, are a great place for founders to come, and not just to get support in using maybe those tools, but to bounce their thoughts off of other founders in a small group setting and be able to develop the plan, like you said, with the support of people in the industry.
Yeah, I think that's a great additional piece of advice or tip for founders as well. Our office hours run for 4 weeks at a time. And so in that 4 weeks, you can enter with information and leave with a really solid plan. So I love that you added that to the list of resources.
Yeah. So if you're looking for more information on any of the tools or services that we just talked about, you can find that on our website, thegoodfoodcfo.com. We'll link to that in the show notes.
We want to thank both April and Leah for contributing to this episode. You can hear Sarah's full conversation with both founders as a Plus member inside the Good Food CFO community. When you upgrade to a Plus membership, you get access to full-length episodes, bonus clips and bonus episodes, live Q&As with podcast guests, and even attend live podcast recordings. To learn more about our Plus membership, visit thegoodfoodcfo.com/join.
Thank you for joining us here today. If you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful or inspiring in any way, please share it with your founder friends on social and rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It's the #1 way to help good food founders find the show. We'll be back with a brand new episode next week.